20th. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, I'm coming to you from podcasting headquarters here, 1022 Studios in Atlanta, Georgia.
Which is why, for anybody watching this on YouTube, you're not only wearing headphones, but you have a huge picture of headphones behind you.
It's very meta. It's like there's the large headphones behind me. I'm actually wearing headphones. But some of you may not know this, but it was almost 3 years ago now, probably more than 3 years ago. I get a message on Instagram from a guy named Jeff Dollar. And he's like, listen, I really like what you're doing on Instagram. I think you should have a podcast. I'm like, yeah. I'm doing Instagram right now. Maybe we'll do a podcast at some point. And then if you go through the messages, a couple months later, he's like, you should do a podcast. I'm a big fan. I think you do really well in podcasting. You should launch a mo.news podcast. Yada, yada, yada. Eventually, we get to spring 2022, and Jill and I have connected. We started to launch a newsletter, and we're like, all right, ready to do a podcast. And literally, I was like, all right, Jeff, we're taking you up on this offer. We're going to do the podcast. Can we launch it in a week?
Well, because I was basically 8.5 months pregnant. So yeah, we were up against a serious deadline.
Right. Wait, why did you choose to launch it then? I was like, don't ask why. Jill was super pregnant. She was about to pop. So we contact Jeff and his wife, Callie, who have 1022 Productions here. We're like, can we launch a podcast in a week? And they're like, yes, we can do that. And so we launch it. Initially, it was a couple days a week. Jill, very soon after, goes on maternity leave. During that time, I decided to go daily because people wanted a daily news podcast. So then Jill comes back and I was like, hey, FYI, when you come back, we now do a daily podcast.
And I'm like,
anyway,
okay,
long story short, we've never met in person. So I'm in Atlanta yesterday to give a speech at the Online News Association conference. And it strikes me that we've been working with Jeff and Callie and the whole team here for 2 years and we've never met in person. And so here I am. We finally met in person Thursday.
I've got a little FOMO. I don't get FOMO about much, Mosh. A little FOMO.
Jill, there are hourly flights, Delta hourly flights from LaGuardia to Hartsfield, Jackson. So we gotta. They can come visit us in New York. We can come down here, but we will get you down here at some point. I should note we did a Mo.news meetup, last second meetup on Wednesday night in Atlanta. Literally landed, had some extra time, so I put up on the Instagram feed hey everyone. I'm at the Hyatt Regency Atlanta bar starting at 9 p.m. tonight. Come on by. And we had almost 20 people who were able to make their way to downtown Atlanta or who live nearby and had a great conversation with a number of you who listen to us on this pod, who follow us on Instagram, and got to meet some of the people. They asked about you, Jill.
I hope to join the next meetup, Mosh.
Right, we're doing the next meetup in Long Island.
What is the question? Are you guys really friends? What do people ask?
No, it was more of I love you guys. I love listening to you guys. It was more compliments. It wasn't really tell me about the real Jill Wagner. What?
No, because the biggest question that we always get is about the products that we advertise, and it's always
yes.
Do you really like?
Do you
Factor
actually
meals?
have Bowl & Branch sheets?
So people usually like the behind the scenes
yes.
kind of stuff. So that's why I asked.
We both actually do use Bowl & Branch sheets. It's true.
And we are
Factory
friends.
Meals. And we are friends. Yes, all of the above. Anyway, so it was very nice to have that meetup. We try to do Mo.news premium meetups, and we'll give the premium folks a heads up. I think we invited everyone Wednesday night. I will make a point of having a more organized one. Frankly, the New York people are a little jealous, Jill, since we're both in that area, and we've done a South Florida meetup and a Atlanta hello and a Chicago hello, but nothing for the New Yorkers. So sorry, New Yorkers, but we're going to do something soon.
I am so down for a Long Island meetup anytime.
Well, we have to accommodate the full tri-state area, right? We got to do a city meetup. We got to do a Long Island meetup. We got to do a Jersey meetup potentially. So,
all right, well,
we're going to fan out this fall.
Okay, let's get to some headlines, shall
yes.
we? Okay, starting in the Middle East, where the Hezbollah leader has vowed that retribution will come after 2 days of attacks. So it is looking like an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon is closer than ever. Back here at home, an Alaska man's charged with threatening to assassinate 6 Supreme Court justices. 4 years later, we still don't know how COVID started. Some new research points to raccoon dogs in the Wuhan market as the pandemic trigger, but not everyone's convinced. It's still pretty controversial.
The lab, Jill. It was the lab.
obviously. Meanwhile, the Justice Department files a $100 million claim in the fatal Baltimore bridge collapse. Renewing your expired passport's about to get a whole lot easier. And SNL taps Ariana Grande, Billie Eilish, John Mulaney, and more for its season 50 lineup, coming just in time for the November election. Plus, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we are watching, reading, and eating. All right, let's start with the increasing concerns about a larger regional war in the Middle East in the aftermath of those communication devices bombs that were targeting Hezbollah this week. Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, called the 2 days of deadly blasts linked to electronic devices in Lebanon a, quote, act of war by Israel. The United States has labeled Hezbollah a terrorist group. It operates mainly out of Lebanon. It's funded and armed by Iran, and it is promising retribution. The leader of the group announcing in a major speech Thursday that, quote, the enemy transgressed all boundaries and red lines. The attacks killed at least 37 people and injured nearly 3,000 more when pagers, walkie-talkies, and other devices used by the terrorist group exploded simultaneously on Tuesday and Wednesday across Lebanon and even in parts of Syria. Nasrallah said the attacks were a major assault on Lebanon, its security and sovereignty. He called it a war crime and an act of war. And he did admit that they dealt an unprecedented blow to Hezbollah and Lebanon. It comes as the Israeli military stepped up its strikes on southern Lebanon and approved plans for the next stage of the conflict along the border between the two countries. Israeli fighter jets struck about 30 Hezbollah rocket launchers and other infrastructure in southern Lebanon on Thursday evening. And then on the Israeli side, 2 soldiers were killed and several others were wounded in a Hezbollah missile and drone attack earlier in the day. Hezbollah has been attacking Israel for the last year as a way to show solidarity with the Hamas terror group in Gaza. Hezbollah, though, far better armed and larger than Hamas. Over the last year, it's killed more than 40 Israelis. It's injured hundreds as they've launched about 8,000 missiles on Israel and hundreds of drones. The attacks have forced about 100,000 Israelis to have to evacuate their homes and businesses for the last year. And Israel says the time is now to push Hezbollah back from their northern border and bring normalcy back to Israel. Hezbollah says Israel can expect no peace while the war in Gaza continues.
Yeah, for the most part, the last few months, the back and forth in the north has been much more pronounced, much more active than the situation in Gaza. Israel responding, Hezbollah attacking, etc. There have been ongoing negotiations. The U.S., this diplomat named Amos Hochstein has been trying to negotiate between the two sides to no avail now for a number of months. The idea is Hezbollah, which operates independently inside Lebanon. Lebanon doesn't have much of a military force. So Hezbollah is a political party / terror group that basically has a whole bunch of territory, neighborhoods across Lebanon. They attack Israel from Lebanon, and Israel and part of the negotiations here have been trying to get Hezbollah to move off of the Israeli border. They have not done so, and so now you potentially see things escalating. In recent months, you've seen an escalation. You've seen Israel assassinating top Hezbollah leaders, taking out commanders. You saw a Hezbollah attack that killed a number of kids on an Israeli soccer field in recent months. And then this week, next level with the walkie-talkie and pager bombs that exploded across Lebanon. So, right now, tensions are always pretty high. Tensions are much higher than they've been. And you have the Israelis saying, we've been trying to negotiate for months. We have 100,000 Israelis who can't go into their homes right now. They're putting pressure on the government. We must do something different. So you see Israel now moving equipment, soldiers to the north in what could be a preview of a larger war, a potential invasion of Lebanon if Hezbollah does not move back from the border. A reminder here when it comes to Hezbollah, this group has been around for more than 40 years. They first came on the scene in the early 80s. That's when, you might recall, they killed just under 300 U.S. Marines in Beirut in multiple bombings. They're a proxy group for Iran, considered a terror group by the U.S., by Europe, by the Israelis. They also operate out of Syria. There have been several wars between the Israelis and Hezbollah through the years. And again, Hezbollah sort of operates independently. I was talking to a friend in Lebanon, not a fan of Hezbollah. He's been saying for years, can't the Israelis just solve this problem for us and actually take out Hezbollah? Because the Lebanese government can't or won't, or a combination therein. And so there's a lot of nervousness right now about an all-out war and what could happen there. I asked him, I was like, listen, are you putting pressure on Hezbollah not to drag you guys into a war again? And he's like, yeah, no, most Lebanese do not want to see this, but the bombings this week did increase some loyalty around Hezbollah, or some sympathy for Hezbollah. And so it's an interesting situation here, because none of us want war. Inflation is sky high. We have lots of problems in Lebanon. But ultimately, Hezbollah takes its orders from Iran, not Lebanon, though it operates in Lebanon. So we'll see what happens there. Jill, still a lot that we're trying to learn about those bombings this week. Some really interesting reporting came out late Wednesday, early Thursday in the New York Times, based on multiple U.S. intelligence and international intelligence officials, about how the Israelis were able to pull off these pager bombs and walkie-talkie bombs. We were talking early in the week about this Taiwanese company, this electronics company, that ostensibly Hezbollah bought these items from. The Taiwanese company says, no, we actually subcontracted to a Hungarian company called BAC Consulting. Well, what we have now learned in the last 24 hours is that BAC Consulting, which we thought was a Hungarian electronics company, actually was a front by the Israeli intelligence service. So apparently it was a shell company, BAC, officially a Hungarian company, but it really operated by the Mossad and Israeli intelligence. Apparently they set up this company a few years ago as a legitimate electronics company with the intention of selling electronics to Hezbollah that had explosives in them, but they became a legit company. They took on ordinary clients. They were building pagers. Again, a front company built by the Israeli intelligence that looked like a Hungarian electronics company. And what they did was they built ordinary devices, and then they built special devices that contain explosive material with the intention of selling them to Lebanon. So this company gets a contract with Lebanon. They sell their first devices in 2022. Thereafter, in recent months, the leader of Hezbollah, you mentioned him, Nasrallah, told the group, hey, we think the Israelis track our cell phones. No more cell phones. We're going to pagers. So they had to order some pagers and some walkie-talkies from this Hungarian company, or so they thought, the Israeli intelligence service. And so they sent them thousands of devices, and the Israelis were using this to track them, and then also at some point blow their communications infrastructure should there be a war. What's evident in recent weeks is something triggered the Israelis here to say, we got to blow the devices now. We can't wait for something else. There are reports out there that Hezbollah, that some people were asking questions about these devices. Unclear exactly what those questions were, but ultimately go time turned out to be this week. But still a remarkable chain of events here going back years, this long operation, Israel setting up a front electronics company, again, selling legitimate pagers out there and electronic devices, and then getting these contracts to sell their devices with explosives in them to Hezbollah.
Mosh, talk about playing the long game. I know that you posted something on Instagram from the writers of Fauda, which is that Israeli Netflix show. And they were like, okay, like we couldn't have even come up with this if we tried.
Yeah, so it's a show that started in Israel that's big on Netflix. Actually, it's the most watched show in the Middle East whenever new seasons come out, in the Arab world and in Israel. And the writers there, one's a journalist, two guys one's a journalist, one's an actor. They both were in a top secret Israeli unit together several decades ago. And it's just the latest evidence that reality is now crazier than fiction. So that's a show, if you don't watch and you're interested in this part of the world and secret operations, that's an interesting watch. At the same time, staying with Netflix here, there's actually a historical series that Sacha Baron Cohen, the guy who played Borat, started as an actor in, where he plays Eli Cohen. Eli Cohen is a famous Israeli spy from the 1950s and 60s. That was another long game scenario. The Israelis basically knew there was a whole expat community of Syrians in Argentina. They put their spy there. He spends a number of years ingratiating himself, getting very close to Syrian leaders, to the point, Jill, several years later, this Israeli spy had made enough friends and was connected enough. They bring him to Syria, and he became a high-up official in the Syrian government, and he was an Israeli spy. And anyway, the series is called The Spy, if you're interested in that. It got to the point where basically he was so close to the leadership of the Syrian government, he was able to feed them stuff on a regular basis. It's one of the reasons the Israelis were able to win It's one of the reasons the Israelis were able to win the Six-Day War in 1967, because the spy they put in there for years inside the Syrian government. So the Israeli intelligence service known for these very long operations, it appears. And in this case, It's the first time we're hearing that they're setting up front electronic companies around the world.
Okay, now to some politics. We're getting some conclusive data about the impact of last week's presidential debate. While Kamala Harris overwhelmingly impressed voters in her debate with Donald Trump, a new set of polls from the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Siena College found that she has failed so far to seize a decisive advantage in the presidential campaign. The race is deadlocked nationally, and while she does have a slight lead in several state polls, the debate does not appear to have moved the needle all that much. A majority of voters in every racial group, age bracket, and education level, even white voters without a college degree, who are typically Trump's most loyal demographic, gave her a positive review of the debate, and yet not enough to jostle a race that appears destined to become a battle of inches this fall. Harris still has some critical vulnerabilities heading into the fall, most notably that far more voters see her as too liberal than view Trump as too conservative. The share of voters who say they still wanted to learn more about Harris was nearly identical, both before and after the debate, suggesting that she might have missed an opportunity to address doubts or provide more details to the public. Concerns about the state of the economy are still widespread. In Pennsylvania, 77% of likely voters say that the economy is poor or fair. Only 22% are calling it excellent or good. And that negative view held true even in key Democratic regions.
Yeah, we talked about how last week it was a big challenge for her because 1 in 3 voters say, I don't know enough about her. And now it appears still about that same amount say, I still don't know enough about her. Will that decide the election? Unclear. On key issues here, you just mentioned the economy, Jill. Voters still favor Trump on the economy. 54% say he'll do a better job on the economy. 54% also say he'll do a better job on immigration. That's basically where he stood and where she stood on those issues before the debate, so no change there. Also, more voters consistently see Trump as the change candidate. Change candidate is typically where you want to be when you run for election these days in America. We always want change. 51% say that he will bring the right kind of change. 49% say she will bring the right kind of change. So effectively a tie there, but more people, slight amount, see him as the change candidate. Trump also got higher marks for saying what he believes and being respected by foreign leaders. Remember, that was an issue she tried to bring up in the debate there. It still appears voters see him as better with foreign leaders. As far as issues she wins on right now, Harris has widened the gap on Trump when it comes to intelligence. Pennsylvania voters were 10 percentage points more likely to say she is intelligent for Harris versus Trump. That was before the debate. After the debate, the gap is now 18 points as far as when voters are asked to describe whether either of the candidates is intelligent. One other notable thing from these new polls, Jill, Trump took the title as the more extreme candidate. 74% believe he is more extreme. 74% describe him as extreme. 46% describe Harris as extreme. But extreme doesn't appear to be a bad thing here. In fact, among the voters who describe Trump as extreme, more than 50% of them also described him as somewhat well, apparently, in this poll. So extreme might be a good thing in terms of extreme change, according to some voters here. So interesting when you see these kind of headline numbers from the polls. You need to ask, like, well, do they actually see that as a good thing, a bad thing? Is that actually important to them? So where are we? Tuesday marks 6 weeks till Election Day, Jill. Voting has already begun. We've already had almost probably 10 million voters vote at this point in the first few weeks of the election between early voting and the ballots that are out there. And so still anyone's guess. I was asked at the Mo.news meetup, all right, Mosh, tell us who's going to win. I said, guys, too early, 50-50. Talk to me like 2 days before the election. Maybe we'll have a better sense then. Or maybe we won't.
Maybe. I was going to say, or maybe not.
Because the thing is, there's a lot of intangibles in this race. We still don't know everything, including, Jill, we got new headlines in the last 24 hours about election interference coming from Iran here. We learned from federal law enforcement here in the U.S. that Iranian hackers, we've been telling you about them, looking to influence the election, sent excerpts from stolen Trump campaign documents. They were able to get inside the Trump campaign and sent them to the Biden campaign back in June. Now, they did not get a response from the Biden campaign. Law enforcement says they did not reply. They got law enforcement involved. Did the Biden campaign use that information in some way, shape, or form? That's also unclear here. But clearly, Iran trying to impact the election here, sort of what Russia did in 2016, where Russia and WikiLeaks were able to hack Clinton campaign documents and they were leaked and the media reported them. This go around, the Biden campaign at the time, reluctant to go very public with it or even respond to it. And then also media organizations, including Politico, have received leaked documents that Iran leaked, that Iran hacked from the Trump campaign, including, I think, the J.D. Vance vetting document. We told you about that. Media this go around versus 8 years later, also reluctant to be publicly reporting that stuff.
Yeah, Politico first reported in August that the Trump campaign was the victim of a hack and leak campaign later tied to Iran, after Politico was among the media groups that received stolen campaign documents. Back in 2016, Trump repeatedly touted internal Democratic emails and other Clinton campaign-related documents released by WikiLeaks that had been hacked and stolen by Russia. Trump said while campaigning against Clinton, quote, "I love WikiLeaks," after the organization posted tens of thousands of emails online that were hacked from Clinton's campaign chairman's account.
So some lessons potentially this time. We know the Iranians are trying to get involved. We know the Russians are trying to get involved. We know the Chinese are trying to get involved. It's going to be an interesting last 6 weeks here, Jill.
All right, time for the speed read from CBS News. The Justice Department says an Alaska man was arrested Wednesday for allegedly threatening to assassinate 6 members of the Supreme Court and harm 2 family members. 76-year-old Panos Anastasio is accused of sending more than 465 messages to the Supreme Court through an online portal, which included violent, racist, and homophobic rhetoric. He allegedly threatened to kidnap, torture, and assassinate the justices, and then encouraged other people to join him in committing acts of violence. He faces 9 counts of making threats against a federal judge and 13 counts of making threats in interstate commerce. He appeared before a federal magistrate judge Wednesday and pleaded not guilty. Attorney General Merrick Garland, a former federal appeals court judge, said in a statement, "Our justice system depends on the ability of judges to make their decisions based on the law and not on fear. Our democracy depends on the ability of public officials to do their jobs without fearing for their lives or the safety of their families." The Supreme Court not commenting on the charges. But crazy story.
So the justices he targeted here are not named in the indictment, Jill. They're just labeled as Supreme Court justices 1 through 6. But it's not hard to tell who he's probably talking about here. The court has a 6-3 split, 6 conservatives, 3 liberals. And so the assumption here is that he was threatening the 6 conservatives here. Charging documents state that some of the threats made by him were intended to intimidate the judges, retaliate against them for official actions, including some of their decisions. They were sent over a 7-month period here between January and July. In one of the messages back in January, he threatened to murder one of the justices by saying he'd like to see the justice and an unidentified former president hanging together from an oak tree. The unnamed former president, likely here former President Trump, as they were handling one of the cases related to him during that time. Apparently, he's been sending these types of messages, Jill, going back into 2023. Supreme Court police reviewed them, determined they were concerning enough to warrant an investigation. The FBI actually interviewed him about the messages, and then he sent a message to the Supreme Court daring the justices to visit his home. A guy with clearly a lot of issues here, Jill. But at the same time, it comes amid a couple assassination attempts here on Trump and just growing threats by a number of citizens to top officials. Remember, there was a guy who was roaming around Brett Kavanaugh's house a couple years ago. And so continuing concerns here about people potentially going to violence here because of their issues in regards to people's politics.
4 years since the start of the COVID pandemic, and we still don't know how it started, but now some researchers are linking it to animals at the Wuhan market with some new data. This from the Washington Post. An international team of scientists published a peer-reviewed paper Thursday saying that genetic evidence indicates the coronavirus pandemic most likely originated with a natural spillover from an animal or animals sold in a market in Wuhan, China, where many of the first human cases of COVID were identified. The paper appears in the journal Cell. It doesn't claim to prove conclusively that the pandemic started in the market, and it is unlikely to end the acrimonious and politicized debate over COVID's origin. For more than 4 years, researchers, intelligence agencies, journalists, and amateur sleuths have tussled over the 2 main scenarios for the pandemic's origin. First, a natural spillover from animals. And second, some kind of leak from a laboratory that was experimenting on coronaviruses. This new report bolsters the natural spillover theory, but it doesn't rule out other origins. A key limitation of the research is that the genetic data obtained by Chinese investigators in the early days of the pandemic, after the market was closed, cannot reveal whether any animal was actually infected with the virus. In an informal report in March of 2023, they presented a central feature of the genetic data, the confirmation that animals potentially capable of triggering a pandemic were in the market.
So that early report comes to us from China. Data from China. It was written over 10 days by Chinese researchers. This new paper in this journal Cell is longer, more comprehensive. It's done by scientists in Europe, the US, and Australia who analyzed the data from the Chinese CDC, including several hundred samples taken in early 2020 in this wet market. The wet market, of course, had animals like rabbits, dogs, raccoon dogs. They're known to be susceptible to SARS-CoV. They're known to be susceptible to infection with SARS-CoV-2, the virus that caused COVID here, raccoon dogs especially. But the issue here, Jill, it's like the chicken or the egg issue. They found the disease at the market, but it doesn't mean that it started the market. It could have been brought to the market from the facility a few blocks away, the lab. And so that's the issue here is, did it start in the lab? Did it start in the market? We're depending on Chinese data. A lot of it is missing. They haven't allowed data collection, haven't allowed evidence. There's some people, some doctors who are missing or not alive anymore from that era. And so you have that issue, finding the specific animals that could have caused the spillover, may be impossible at this point. It's probably impossible at this point. And, ultimately here, we're going to continue to get these studies about the question of our time, right? Like COVID, the biggest event of a decade, the biggest event of this century, probably the 21st century, given its impact, the millions of people who died, how it, turned over economies in the world, et cetera. We may never know how this started because, of course, the Chinese are not being very transparent about it, which then reinforces the assertion that it came from the virology lab in Wuhan and not the wet market. Why else would they be so closed off about this? And it comes as we brought you earlier that U.S. intelligence agencies are split on this, that there's several intelligence agencies here in the U.S. They've done their own assessment that it did come from the lab because the lab, of course, was studying coronaviruses and looking to test them in different ways. And then you have some intelligence agencies here in the U.S., we have almost 24 of them, who say, well, it probably came from the wet market. And then the majority of them are like, we still can't figure out where this thing started.
From CNN, the Justice Department seeking more than $100 million from two corporations that owned and operated the container ship that destroyed Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge in March. According to the DOJ lawsuit, the company's cost-cutting and negligence in the ship's maintenance led to the disaster, which they say was entirely avoidable.
They say in the lawsuit that it was an ill-prepared crew on an abjectly unseaworthy vessel. Prosecutors say that the financial penalty would cover the cost of the government response to the bridge collapse and for the effort to clear the wreckage here of 50,000 tons of steel, concrete, asphalt. Baltimore, the city, has also filed its own claim against the two companies. Families of the three victims have said they intend to sue as well. So multiple suits that will be following here in what is going to be a multiple-year recovery effort and rebuilding effort to rebuild that bridge there.
From the Wall Street Journal, U.S. travelers can now renew their expired passports online. The State Department this week launched a new online program. It will let adult Americans renew 10-year passports that have expired within the past 5 years. People with passports that will expire within the next year are also eligible to use the new online service. The announcement follows the State Department's limited relaunch of its online renewal program earlier this summer. Travelers will be able to pay, upload photos, and apply online with no need to appear in person or send documents through the mail. The State Department estimates about 5 million people a year will be able to use the service. First-time applicants will still need to apply through the mail, and children as well not eligible to renew online.
So just like mail renewal, a passport that has expired within the last 5 years can be renewed online. As of now, only adult passports are available to be renewed online, and those living in the U.S., either a state or a territory, can do the renewal online. Processing time remains about 6 to 8 weeks here. Though I have heard, Jill, from people who are getting it sooner than that.
I just renewed my passport, but I did it expedited, and I got it, I think, within a week. It was pretty quick.
You had to urgently leave the country?
You don't know what's going on over here, Mosh.
Jill, is there anything I need to know why you had to expedite that passport to get it there in a week? Why? Where are you going and why and for how long?
We were planning a trip, obviously, out of the country, and we wound up going to the North Fork of Long Island. That's how we roll here.
Got it. But the expedited thing, basically, was that just like not realizing that the passport was about to expire, or was that?
Yes, it was because my husband and I were about to book our trip, and I looked at my passport and realized it had expired like 2 years ago.
Got it. All right.
And by the way, it had my maiden name, not my married name. So it was like a lot going on.
By the way, I imagine there's like federal law enforcement that like anytime anyone applies for an expedited passport, they're like doing an extra like,
yeah,
hey,
exactly.
Like St. Thomas like, hey, you should look into these people. Like, what are they trying to do here?
What are they in such a rush to leave the country?
To leave the country.
And finally, from USA Today, Saturday Night Live is back with new and returning stars for its historic 50th season. The NBC sketch comedy has announced the hosts and musical performers for the first 5 episodes of the new series. We're talking Ariana Grande returning to hosting duties for a second time, although she'll be leaving the musical guest spot open for Stevie Nicks. Other stars taking on the hosting gig include Hacks star Gene Smart, John Mulaney, and Michael Keaton. Meanwhile, early performers for this season include Billie Eilish, Jelly Roll, and Coldplay.
So it returns officially September 28th. Grande made an appearance last season as a musical guest. The singer is gearing up for the release of Wicked, the first of the 2-part musical film that premieres later this year in late November. Meanwhile, Smart is making her decades-long return following her Emmy wins for her role in Hacks, and Keaton is currently in full Beetlejuice mode. It's going to be an interesting few months, Jill, especially as we have an election. It's going to be an interesting few weeks here, Jill, especially because it's an election time, and often people look to the SNL sketches. So they've had difficulty in recent years being as good as reality as we talk about what's going on in the Middle East, also in American politics. Like sometimes literally the sketches are reading what's happening in real life, and they don't have to come up with anything else when it comes to the debate and back and forth. I imagine they'll have stuff about eating cats and dogs. We'll see what's relevant as we go week by week here. And it's going to be fun to watch. SNL alum Maya Rudolph will be back to reprise her role as Vice President Kamala Harris. James Austin Johnson will be playing Donald Trump. I imagine there'll be some interesting surprises. There typically are when it comes to presidential election years on SNL. And one personal note, if any of you have a connection to SNL, my wife is a huge John Mulaney fan, would very much like to get tickets to get into SNL for the Mulaney episode. I've never been myself. Jill, have you ever been to SNL live in studio?
I've been to the rehearsal, but it is the hardest ticket in showbiz.
Yes.
I was an NBC Page. I was in the Page program. So I've been to the rehearsals and I used to give tours of the studios.
Jill, I have confidence that someone here in the Mo News audience listening to this podcast might have a connection somewhere. Let me know.
And get 3 tickets so I can come. I mean, I want in.
Oh, all right. So we're looking for 3 tickets. Or Jill, did we just get you in trouble? Should you be asking for your husband too? We need 4. All right. The offer is now we need 4 tickets for SNL. Okay.
Michael loves nothing more than a night to watch college football. A Saturday night, being left alone to watch college football. That's his ideal evening.
We need 3 tickets. Okay.
All right, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for We Are Watching, Reading, and Eating. Mosh, what are you watching?
Some uplifting stuff, Jill. I never saw Civil War in the theaters, like literally a film about a civil war happening here in the U.S. It's on Max now. It's the Kirsten Dunst dystopian film about journalists racing to D.C. in an attempt to prevent an attack as the country falls apart. I might watch that this weekend because, the news has been too uplifting. Jill, what are you watching?
All right, I am watching on Netflix a movie called A Family Affair. It stars Zac Efron and Nicole Kidman. I actually started watching it a couple of nights ago. So Zac Efron plays a movie star. Nicole Kidman plays the mom of one of his assistants, and they apparently have kind of like a love affair. It's really good so far. I'm into it. Although they both like have too much Botox or something. There's something wrong with both of their faces.
Too much Botox in Hollywood these days.
I don't know. I'm
That's
like,
some
it's
breaking
something
news.
like off with Zac Efron's face. I can't figure it out. If anybody here is watching this movie, message me on Instagram and let me know if I'm crazy. Jill R. Wagner. I could be crazy and just think everyone's using Botox, but like their faces aren't moving or something.
All right.
Mosh, what are you reading?
Jill, there's a new book out about the recent history of Twitter and what happened when Elon Musk took over. Some interesting reporting from some New York Times reporters, Kate Conger and Ryan Mack. The book is called Character Limits, so I'm going to get into that. What are you reading?
All right, so I read this article on parents.com. It's called These 23 Parenting Hacks Might Just Change Your Life. So it's basically, I thought, clickbait. So obviously I clicked.
How many of the hacks, like of the 23, how many were like, whoa, that's interesting and new?
So the reason that I'm mentioning this is because a bunch of them were really, really good tips, and it felt like they came from parents. And I'm just going to give one of them. They say that when you go to restaurants, order ahead for toddler meals. They quote someone who says, whenever we plan to eat out at a restaurant, I call ahead and place a to-go order just for my toddler. And once we're there, we say we are dining in instead, and it lets the food cool down and the hungry toddler can be relaxed and fed by the time we get our food. Normally, Mosh, when we go to a restaurant, we just immediately order for the kids, but it still can take a while. So you're dealing with kind of like hangry kids. So I'm definitely going to try this one.
Jill, that assumes that there's a phone number where they actually pick up at the restaurants. Increasingly, when I call a restaurant, like nobody picks up. Like they're like, oh, you got to make your reservations online and deal with those online. So
yes, I guess that is the one.
they have to pick up the phone.
That's the one snag there.
Yes, yes.
Okay, Mosh, what are we eating?
Jill, you know, one of our newest partners here in Mo News is Element Electrolyte Powder. And so as a new sponsor, they are what I am eating this weekend. It's electrolyte powder, so it goes in your water. So it's not really eating; it's more like what I'm drinking this weekend. But they have a lot of great flavors. Citrus salt is my favorite right now. It helps you keep your energy up and also stay hydrated. It's important to both get your water, but also get that sodium, and that's where Element LMNT, you might be familiar with their logo, comes in clutch. Tons of flavors here, no sugar, and again, helps you drink your water and ensure that you are ensure that you're not going to have an electrolyte deficiency. If you go to the website right now, they have a special deal for the Mo News community. Drinkelement.com/Mo News. That is drinklmnt.com/Mo News to get a free sample pack with any of your purchases. So that's what I'm drinking this weekend, Jill. What are you eating?
Well, first, I'll say I'm also a huge fan of Element, and I've been playing a lot of tennis. So I've been putting some of their powder into my water, and it's been a huge help.
Yes, because we're going to get you into the U.S. Open next year as a player, not as a fan.
Yes, the senior league. Okay, Mosh, as for what I am eating, I'll tell you what I'm not eating. Okay, I'm going to use this as a little bit of a vent session.
Okay, this might be a first, everybody.
All right. I am not eating at Peter Luger Steakhouse on Long Island. It is a very well-known steakhouse. It's also all cash. So my father and his friend did not know that, and they went to go pay the bill, and they only had credit cards, and the staff wouldn't let them leave, which I get in a way because they obviously don't want people to run out on the bill. But they did.
Do they have like an ATM machine or something?
They have no ATM.
Okay.
My dad and his friends, the bill was $200 and something. So they actually wound up having just $200 on them combined. So they said they'd give them that. And they said they'd leave their credit cards and come back tomorrow with the rest. They said, no way. The restaurant emptied out and they were basically holding them there. Needless to say, my dad's friend, and these are guys, they're like in their mid to late 70s. My dad's friend went to an ATM. He came back with the cash, and then the cashier basically tried to give him the wrong amount of change, like not enough change, either thinking he wouldn't notice or what.
They took a fine for their, delay.
Yeah, and then started paying him in singles. And he's like, you owe me, like $40. What is happening here? Needless to say, it was a pretty bad experience for my dad. And I told him I'd talk about it on the podcast. So,
all right. So
there you
Jill,
go.
what are you doing this weekend? Anywhere but Peter Luger's. Jill, the last time we brought up Peter Luger's is when RFK brought the dead bear in his car, left it to be valeted at Peter Luger's, and then took the bear to Central Park with the used bike. That whole thing. Peter Luger's. It's been a rough couple of months for you guys in the headlines.
Just because it's like you don't even want to be associated with that story. It's so weird. You're just like, can you leave us out of this? And by the way,
it sounds like RFK Jr. had a better experience with a dead bear in his car at Peter Luger's than your father did.
Yes, he did. My dad was totally shook by it all. But no, either way, it's like, look, it is their policy. Sure. But come on, get a grip.
Definitely check the website in advance, everybody. Lesson learned.
Okay, thank you all for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. Will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Everyone have a wonderful weekend.
All right, bye, everyone.